Welcome to Knitting and Accessibility, where I talk about accessibility and I knit at the same time. So today I thought we can talk about my experience and how I got to learn accessibility and how I'm learning it right now, what helped me the most, just professional, I guess, things like that. So I got acquainted with accessibility when I married my husband in 2016 because he's an amputee, and then I was able to notice how inaccessible like everything is. So then I started to notice, that the internet is not accessible as well. But it wasn't until 2018 that I started to really learn it a lot and to start actually making accessible websites. And of course, I started with making my clients' websites a little bit more accessible, and then this stitch is just stuck. And then I redesigned my website to be accessible, and then I started to do auditing for clients. Basically, what that means is clients will hire me to audit their website, and basically what you do is you test the website with various screen readers, and then you create a report, and then the clients would either send that report to their programmers, or they would ask me to fix the website for them. And having this report, it was actually very much easier for me to fix the website once everything was written down about what needed to be fixed. So that was pretty much how it started. And so I worked at Microsoft as a contractor with accessibility. Now I'm at the Airbnb contractor for accessibility. And basically, my two jobs were a little bit different. So at Airbnb, I mostly focus on fixing the issues. Of course, I also do, basically I help my teammates when they get stuck in accessibility, or my teammates help me when I get stuck on accessibility. And I think for me, I know development and programming and accessibility at the same time, which I think is something that is very rare. I mean, anyone can learn ARIA, but it's very difficult to learn how to implement ARIA correctly. And as how I learned, I basically, when I started, there wasn't as much information about accessibility as there is on the web. So I just read the WCAG, and for like a weekend, I just did nothing but read it. And it was a lot. Yes, it was a lot. And I try to read every day a little bit of the WCAG so I can get updated in my mind, so to say. And every time I learn a new accessibility, concept, I would just code it. So let's say I learned, okay, so you can use ARIA hidden to hide visible elements on the screen from screen readers. So I would try to do that. I think another thing that helps me with accessibility and learning it is teaching it as well, because every time I have to make a video, I have to go into the ARIA spec, I go to the WCAG, if something is not very clear to me, I either post in a forum to ask people what they think about XYZ, or I just ask my teammates, hey, do you think XYZ is correct? I think that what's very important is to learn to test with screen readers, which took me a while. It is not easy, and I think the most difficult thing is that there aren't really many guides online how to test with screen readers. Google has accessibility playlist on YouTube with Rob Dodson, I think he created amazing series about how to test with VoiceOver and TalkBack. I think he also has them for NVDA as well. So testing is really important. But if you ask me what is the thing that helped me the most with learning accessibility, is just talking to accessibility professionals. So I learned the most when I joined Microsoft, because Microsoft had an accessibility team, and they have, I would just go and ask them questions and they will reply, because, I think people in accessibility are the nicest people I've ever met. And basically, I've worked exclusively in accessibility since 2018, and I can only think 3 people off the top of my head that I met for that amount of time that work in accessibility that I really absolutely do not like. Like, I had to pinch myself not to call them names because they're just not nice people. But most, like 99.9% of people meet accessibility are so nice. They always want to share their knowledge. They always want to learn, which is something really nice. But yes, just if you get stuck, if you can find a mentor. So right now I'm mentoring Next Gen. I'm a mentor in the Next Gen Accessibility Initiative, which is matching mentors and mentees. So I mentor this person for accessibility, and they ask me questions and I reply. I show them things on my screen. Like they have questions about alt text or how to test forms to make sure they're accessible and the users have all the information they need. For example, is this field really required or optional? You know. So I think if you can find someone to help you, or just someone you can ask questions to, I think this will be the biggest thing that helps you in accessibility. Of course, at every job I go, if they have an accessibility team, I always ask questions. I usually post in like the public forum for the company so that different people can have different opinions instead of DMing, but sometimes I DM people as well. But I think the public thing, well, it's the company Slack or Microsoft Teams, so it's not really public. It's better because I get so many opinions from so many different people, and accessibility is very much a lot of opinions on it. And I can tell you a funny story actually. When I was at Microsoft, the accessibility professionals there, they told me, no, do not use tooltips. And I'm not talking about the title attribute. I talk about, you know, those tooltips that you get when you hover over buttons. And so everyone was very adamant to them, and they'll, you know, every time I have a tooltip question, they'll be like, oh, just don't use it because they're useless and they don't really provide much context. And I thought up until last week, you know, the tooltips are useless. Don't use them at all. And you probably see tooltips for like when you hover over buttons for media players, because, you know, when you hover over the pause button, there's a balloon that shows up, you know, pause. But then up until last week, I was in a conversation. I wanted to learn more about voice recognition software, and I have a colleague who's like an expert in voice recognition because they also use it as well. And they told me actually that tooltips are very useful when you want to activate icon buttons with voice recognition, because the only way to activate icon buttons is for you to know their accessible name. Well, if they're using area label and there's no text on the screen, hence what makes them icon buttons, not icon buttons with text, how do you know, for example, the name of this button is menu or hamburger? But if you hover over, you know, and the tooltip appears, that if the tooltip matches the accessible name, it actually makes it much more easier to work with voice recognition software. Otherwise, you just have to guess, okay, is it menu? Is it hamburger? Is it play? Is it play button? What is it? And that just really opened my eyes. So I think another thing that is very important for learning is to talk to users who use accessibility, assistive technologies, screen readers, voice recognition. I was fortunate enough to meet someone on the accessibility Slack who uses Windows high contrast mode, and I asked them a few questions, and wow, they shared so much knowledge, for which I'm very grateful for. But it like opened my eyes to a lot of the things I was ignorant at. So for example, with the Windows high contrast mode, I thought if you have text next to your icon, you don't need the icon to show up. You don't need the icon to show up, because the icon in this case will just be decoration. Well, actually, no, it is important for them, the icons, to show even if there is text nearby, because it helps with, you know, it reduces your cognitive load. You don't have to read every single text. You can just glance at it and know that this icon, you know, does X, Y, Z. And I think that was like very eye-opening. So if you can find a mentor, just do it. And if you work at a company where they have an accessibility team, just ask them questions. They're always happy to help. And if you can find also people who use assistive technologies and ask them questions, that will also help so much, because there's nothing like user feedback of people who actually use it. Because there's a difference between using a screen reader every day to, you know, browse your phone or browse the internet, you know, go on Facebook, or like me, who I only use a screen reader to test things. Okay, so if I think this is correct, then it is correct. There's also a difference between a disabled user using a screen reader working as a tester and a disabled person using a screen reader, you know, that is not a professional tester as well, because you get different viewpoints. The professional tester, even if they are also an assistive technology user, they are very professional and they can use like multiple keystrokes. They're like absolute pros. Well, the everyday person is not an absolute pro. And even if they're using assistive technology every day, because they're probably just using it as much as they can to, complete a task, and that's it. And that's for everything. For example, I don't know all the keystrokes on my keyboard and all the shortcuts on my Windows machine, because I just use it as much as I can to get by. But I'm not a professional, keyboard designer or something like that, if that makes sense. So let me tell you a little bit about how I started with programming. I started learning programming when I was 17. I unfortunately didn't have the opportunity to go to college, so I don't have a degree. But I learned programming, with websites, books, and videos. My parents didn't agree with my career choice to be a programmer, so they never bought me any books or any learning materials, so I had to just read things online. And it was very difficult, I think it helped me, to be self-taught about everything, because in programming you can learn programming in college, but things like web development is very difficult to learn in college, because they mostly just teach you theory instead of practicality. But if you have a degree, that's great. I don't want to discourage anybody to have a degree. I worked my whole life, ever since I was 16. And it would have been nice for 4 years to just focus on studying, at college. Instead, I had to work. So, but on the other hand, even though I don't have a college degree, I do have 10 years of experience, and I'm 28, because I started at 17 to work and get experience. I got clients, I freelanced, and afterwards, I just kept learning. And I started as a full stack developer, which I think most people did back then, because the full stack wasn't as complicated as it is now. Basically, you have to learn HTML, CSS. Nobody was making accessible websites. Well, nobody that I knew, at least. Accessibility wasn't very famous, unfortunately. And basically, you learn HTML, CSS, PHP, and MySQL for database. I was a full stack developer, and I was freelancing for many, many years. I freelanced until 2016. When I came to the United States and I married my husband. And the reason I like freelancing so much is because I could work from home. I just do not like going to the office. I don't like that. I prefer working from home. I'm the most productive then. Yeah, working from home is the best. I worked in an office, of course, when I got married again. And I got my, work certificate? Work authorization? Right, so when you arrive in the United States, on a fiancé visa, which what I did, after you get married, you have to apply for a work authorization. That takes anywhere from 2 to 10 months. I was lucky enough to get it for 2 months, and I started a job at a web design agency, and I worked there for 6 months. Then after the 6 months, I returned programming again, being a freelancer, I think being a freelancer in the United States for web development is much more difficult than in Bulgaria, because Bulgaria doesn't have as many programmers as they do now here, and a lot of people in Bulgaria don't speak very good English, so it's like mandatory that if you're freelancing making websites that you know Bulgarian, so that they can actually tell you what they want from their website. But here it is much more difficult because there's so many programmers, and everybody speaks English. English is lingua franca of the world. So I freelanced, and then I found out about accessibility, and I freelanced a little bit about that, and then I just contracted at other companies. It was very interesting, like my journey. I just made websites. I made my website when I was very fresh with accessibility, very green. Not made, but I redesigned it, and now when I go on it, I'm like, oh my god, I made so many mistakes. And that's fine. I actually read a LinkedIn post by this influencer on LinkedIn who happens to be deaf, and they said that they see so much negativity, and that actually discourages website owners from actually making accessible things because everyone's criticizing them. And I think that's partly true. If you open my website, it is accessible, but it has issues. And people who want to hire me, maybe they'll think, okay, maybe she doesn't know accessibility because her website has issues. Well, that's as much as I knew back then. Okay, so I constantly upgrade my knowledge. Like, I have coded and recoded the hamburger menu like so many times, and every time I learn something new. And just like last week, I learned, okay, so you need tooltips if you have an icon button or an icon control, so people with voice recognition software can actually operate it. And you know, I probably should have added a tooltip to my hamburger menu. But on the other hand, you know, I usually have text next to my hamburger menu. I love working from home, and the other reason I freelanced for so long, I have 10 years of experience, and I worked at companies for 2 years, so I freelanced for 8 years. Because working from home is very great. I just don't like working at offices. I don't think I ever will, but you know, never say never. I can focus so much better, and I can take breaks, take snacks. You know, in an office, everything is just so rigid, and I didn't like that. And I think it's better because I can learn, I can open the WCAG. But in the office, everyone's looking at your computer, right? So if they see me reading the WCAG all the time, they're probably gonna think I don't do any work or something like that. But if you want to learn accessibility, you should do it. I think anyone can learn programming and accessibility if they just want to learn. You just have to read a lot, experiment a lot, and you know, you can do it. And I also think the teaching helps me keep up to date. So when I was interviewing for Airbnb, I was actually creating a course on ARIA. So I was very deep into documentation, reading the specs all the time because I was creating a course and I didn't want to give my students misinformation. Well, the interview with Airbnb was like 90% ARIA questions, and I just destroyed the interview, like in a good way. Like they said that they were very impressed with my performance during the interview because I've been coding ARIA for 2 months creating my course, and I just knew so much at that moment. Of course, afterwards you forget things, but yeah, if you can teach people as well, I think that helps. Plus, if I ever teach something that's not true, you know, people call me out on it and I correct it. And I can also look at my old videos and say, wow, I was really green when I made those. That's why it is always good to better yourself. And I think the difference between working as an accessibility engineer to just an engineer is that your role is multifaceted. So I have to do a lot of things. I have to do testing, filing bugs, QA. I have to program. I have to do program management as well, because if this issue must be solved by a designer, I have to chase down the designer. I have to explain it to them. I have to teach, because a lot of people don't know accessibility, even if they have many years of engineering experience. So I have to explain, yes, you need ARIA label here, or you don't need ARIA hidden on visible text. So if you don't enjoy any of those things, it's going to be very hard. But I think in time you just get used to it. I still do engineering and programming, of course, but it is not compared to what it was before, where it was like 90% it was just programming and engineering. But I'm very happy so far, and I think anyone can learn. So yes, keep learning, and if you have any questions, you can also ask me. And yeah, I think that's it for now. Please like and subscribe. Subscribe to the channel and like the video. Okay, bye. Thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like this video. You can find links to my courses in the description of this video. Thank you.